Boost your value with emotional skills. This is a real skills workshop. I'm Rick from Thriving Now, and I'm here with Kathy Vartuli from Thriving Now and the Intimacy Dojo. Kathy, we've done about 50 of these real skills
Wow,
workshops.
it's pretty
Yeah,
amazing. Feels
where
like time flies.
I'm so excited about the fact that we've had a chance to engage around so many different aspects of emotional skills. And this is an opportunity for us and the community of which that co-creates this with us
Yes.
to come together again and ground it around, what does it mean to do emotional skills and how does that add value to our life? Because I think that value is a measure of our own inner experience of something, our external experience of ourselves, and the feedback that we get from the world. You and I had a chance to sync up a little bit before. Would you like to get us started with this?
Sure. Um, I think that value is important to most people in different ways. Value tells us what's important in a contributory way towards our life, whether it brings us more pleasure or makes us feel more confident. And everyone has different things. Like I was just before we started this recording, I was talking about being at a marketing seminar where everyone was jumping up and down and very excited, and they really value enthusiasm. And I could step into that and be there because they're very authentic. They're not hypey. Um, but different groups and different people will have different things they value. And one of the things that Rick and I were talking about is how important it is to know what we internally value. Um, we are social animals. We care about what people around us think about. Our primitive brain cares about what everybody around us thinks about until we educate it. But as we're moving forward, I think it's the more we know each other, know ourselves and the people we're close to, the more we can tune into those values and make choices about our time and our energy and our money, how we're prioritizing things around us. And there is value. We tend to prioritize things. There are certain people I prioritize. Like if Rick calls, I always, unless I'm in the middle of some business meeting, I'm going to answer the phone call because he's very high priority. He's very high value for me. He adds so much to my world. So I think that when we look at value, we're kind of looking at like, what do I want to put my attention on? What do I want to focus on? Um, and when we're talking about our own internal value, like our value to ourselves, often we were taught to put that aside. For many of us, I grew up where I just thought it was better not to value myself because then when people stomped on my boundaries, it didn't really matter so much. It wasn't really like I was like, oh, yeah, but that doesn't matter. I'm not important. So it was a way to tolerate being treated in ways that weren't what I would have liked. So I think when we start valuing ourselves, we can start setting better boundaries, making better choices, and flowing in our lives in a way that's authentic to us. And to do that, we have to have our own values, not someone else's. Does that resonate for you, Rick?
It does. I've been thinking about, um, I've been aware for a long time since I started coaching that there's a very tender area, like you said, like someone who was in a unsafe, unsupported, didn't get to develop your own clarity about what matters to you growing up. You end up being staying very externally referenced. That's the technical term. And I was like, what does that mean? Well, like the difference between enjoying pleasing people, which is an inner value of me. Like I love to be in a relationship where my presence and my engagement and even my humor is pleasing. It doesn't have to be all the time. Like there's a quality I value flexibility and consent and everybody has their range, but I value in being in pleasing relationships. That's different than when I was a people pleaser. And we did a session on that. Like people pleasing is like, I need to tune myself to what other people are giving me and morph myself to be pleasing to them. Can we all feel how um, one is a survival oriented, like I must please my boss or else. there's a quality of like, for me, I I want to have clients and community that are pleased with what they get, that they're spending their life and their money to be in this relationship. And I want it to be pleasing to them, but there's not that same kind of vibe of have to. Um, and so I believe that the more that we do with emotional skills, particularly we're coming off of that series of Be What Matters, where you got to tune into something that you value. And now here we are, we're looking at how do we boost our value? And again, like I'm coming back in my own life like, oh, if I'm really more and more aware of what I value inside of myself, um, I feel more solid. I feel more calm. I feel more confident. When someone has a different value set, it's less that I have to adapt and more like, oh, well, that's their set of values and these are mine. And I treasure mine, treasure, value, feel the energy of that. And I were both very tender that we didn't come from a place where our values were ever asked about. Like, I don't remember anyone asking, what do you really value? I was told and projected that what I needed to do was build a very successful company. I needed to move up the socioeconomic ladder. There were all kinds of like external values that were laid upon me, and that made me miserable and sick until I started really being attuned to what matters in my core as that and that awareness.
I think there's a contrast, and I'm wondering if you'd like to write in the chat how you were brought up. When I was being brought up, it was just assumed that I was going to have the same perspective as my mother and father, and that I didn't have different values from them.
Uh,
And I watched Rick and his partner with Adira, this little two, and she's 2.5 today. And she has very distinct opinions and very like strong. Like we had a long no discussion last night when I was talking to her. She did not want me to get off the phone. She was very clear, and I don't remember being clear like that. I remember like having realized, and maybe I was more than I really. Yeah, it's hard to remember when you're 2.5, but I remember thinking, oh, I need to conform to these people. And I remember feeling very confused when my internal reference wasn't their reference. And they just acted kind of like, oh, this is how it is. This is the perspective. This is the experience. Of course you like this because we like this. Of course you believe this because I believe this. Someone shared I was brought up to match my parents' values totally. And I
the
think that
kind
we're
of conformity
Mhm.
is, we're here as part of an emotional freedom circle. Conformity probably is not our sweet spot, or you wouldn't probably be here. So I'm making some assumptions there, but yeah, well, freedom is a very different value from conformity. Freedom of choice and consent is different from obligation. Um, they're felt differently and they're valued differently. And if you're going counter to how you were raised and counter to maybe parts of your culture or even people that are around you now, um, it takes skill and it takes work. It
Mhm.
takes skillful application of some things that we've been doing together. Um, Go ahead.
I think oh, I went someone shared I was spooked by my family's values, strong contrast. And I think it's important to notice that if we were brought up in a place where we didn't kind of match, we could have like it could be easier to give up our own beliefs, or maybe we kind of fought them or just felt a little bit like we didn't fit into the world. And for many of us, I think that there was um I think a lot of the people that are here, our family may have had a lot of trauma, which very much narrows the viewpoint. People that
Yeah.
are traumatized do not have the energy or the focus to look from different perspectives. They tend to just dive into the one that they know. And I also know that, like, I was brought up in upstate New York. It was very rural. There wasn't a lot of exposure to anything else. And so, like, when I went overseas as a Rotary Rotary exchange student, it was like the shock to see like how different people lived. And then depending on where we were brought up, we might have had more or less access to like, oh, it's just okay to think differently, or everybody thinks the same, and there's something wrong that we don't have that same, we don't conform to that. I grew up hearing why I didn't raise you that way. I think that's what it says. And I was
We
brought
didn't
up in a
raise you that
culture.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what else. I was brought up in a culture to respect elders, but I think that came with the assumptions and baggage. Yeah. Just
Well, even something like respect, there's a difference between respect
then
that
conform.
requires conformity and authoritarian hierarchy,
Mhm.
and respect of the person as a human being who's had experiences. And if it's not like, I don't consider a situation where the respect isn't mutually shared, that there's not an energy of that, to be a respectful space. It's something different than that. I'm curious, if is there a value that you hold? Love to hear it in the chat. Is there a value that you hold that you find difficult to to hold that value? It doesn't necessarily feel okay to have that value, based upon your past, based upon some noise. What is it that comes up for you? There's a value that you have a challenge with, that you'd like a little boost to that sense of it being okay.
Someone shared I was brought up that all are equal until I brought home a friend who apparently wasn't. And yeah, I think I've had experience with that too, where, oh, it's fine. Oh, wait, you're dating an Asian person? Like, oh, that's not like, why are you dating the person said, why are you dating a brownie? And I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, what? Because he's a really cool
Mm.
guy. Like, why wouldn't I date him? Um, but it can be shocking for our ecosystem when people are like, wait, that's not okay. Um, the values of lovingness and kindness being okay. Shared.
Yeah.
Um,
You want to do some tapping together on it's okay to have value, to be aware of our values, to boost our value? Would you like to lead us in that?
yeah, yeah. So I just invite you to take a
We can
deep breath.
blend in
That's good.
lovingness and kindness, which are
Yeah.
a challenge.
We'll start here, and I would like to go in a little more about where we're allowed to value ourselves as a separate.
Yeah.
This is just about permission to be different from people that are around us. So I invite you, if you can, let the Facebook cats be quiet for now. Like they'll be there when you come back. Just let your attention come to this circle of all these people that are really awesome and considering like how they can increase their value. How can they look at things in a different way? That's pretty amazing to have this many people gathering together to look at something that, a lot of people that I grew up with be like, what are you doing? Like, clean the car, take out the trash. Like, why are you wasting your time on that stuff? But I think it really matters when we can be conscious of all this. So if you can, just let yourself come here and now with all these people. Let yourself kind of sink into your body if that feels safe to you. Wiggle your butt in the chair if that feels all right. Take a nice, slow, deep breath. Karate chop. Even though I wasn't really encouraged to know my own values,
Even though I wasn't really encouraged to know my own values,
they didn't even consider that I might have something different from them.
they didn't even consider that I might have something different from them.
I like that somehow I innately knew that
I like
something. Go
I
ahead.
like that somehow I innately knew
That some of the things they valued weren't for me.
that some of the things they valued were not for me.
I think that says something kind of awesome about me.
Ah, I think that says something kind of awesome about me.
My little being knew that there was something off in their beliefs,
My little being knew there was something off in their beliefs,
at least for my internal reference.
or at least from my internal reference.
Top of the head, I really believe in lovingness and kindness.
I really believe in lovingness and kindness.
Eyebrow, and I'm really curious.
and I'm really curious.
Side of the eye, I wanted to know more.
I wanted to know more.
Under the eye, I didn't want to conform.
I didn't want to conform.
Under the nose, some part of my little being said, no, no, no.
Some part of my little being said, no, 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 no,
Chin,
no.
I love that I rebelled as that small child.
I love that I kept my rebellion alive,
Collarbone, even if I had to hide it back then.
even though I did have to hide it back then.
Under the arm, there is a part of me that really knows what's important to me.
There's a part of me that really does know what's important to me.
Top of the head, I love that that part of me exists.
And I love that that part of me exists.
I'd like to get to know that part of me better today.
And I'd like to get to know that part of me better today.
And just take a breath. And I really do think it's awesome that, each of us here had, I would imagine every one of us here had some kind of part of you is like, right, no, that doesn't feel right. That's not quite like we didn't, we were never broken enough that we just lost our sense of self, our sense of what was good and right. And that's really, really lovely. I think it's important. Um,
So it can be really helpful when you're in a process like this to take a look at the dark side of it.
Mhm.
Like when you imagine, oh, I'm walking around and I really feel solid in my value. I can boost my sense of it. I can glow with it. I can really be very clear about myself and what matters to me. Is there anything that doesn't feel okay about that? We'd love to hear.
Well, I think we actually already have. I'd love to address. There's a couple that are really important, but I'd like to start with the issue around money. So someone shared, I have a value that money isn't everything, but I feel in conflict with that sometimes because I don't want to be poor again. Um, so I think that what we often make things very black and white, very binary, good or bad, especially when we've had trauma around a certain thing. So for many of us, we've had trauma around money. We got that very legitimately from our parents who had no idea or skills, they had no emotional skills around money.
Right.
Um, so a lot of I work with a lot of people that feel like money is the root of evil. We shouldn't rely on it, or they, just like, oh, I want it, but I don't feel like I deserve it, or I shouldn't have it because other people don't have it. There's a lot of conflicting feelings around it. And yet we do live in a society where money is a very convenient way to get around and it can make our lives so much better. So I think that we can have some conflict about, like, we may have conflict about everything, something. We may not feel like we want to make it our sole focus in life and we can still want it. For instance, I love chocolate cake. I know it's so silly example, but I love chocolate cake. I don't want it to be everything for me. I don't want it to be like, oh, I'm not going to talk to Rick because I'm going to eat chocolate cake. I'm going to like just buy chocolate cake and just have chocolate cake all the time, like for every meal. And yet I think life would be sad because, like, on my birthday, I love having chocolate cake. I feel very special when I have chocolate cake on my birthday. So I don't know if that silly analogy helps, but it's like, what if we're aware that we want to have balance around money? That we want to have enough, that we're comfortable, we have abundance, it adds that ease to our lives. And we're also aware that we don't want to make it the sole focus of our lives where we ignore other people, we forget about love, kindness, integrity. Um, so what if that feeling of conflict is actually just a desire for balance? And maybe there's some old traumas or beliefs that could be tapped on and cleared, but what if it's just like, oh, part of me thinks I should really have balance around this and not let it become something I chase all the time? Need some tapping on that?
Um,
Just
I have more to say, but let's tap
okay, go
on.
ahead.
Yeah. Um, hmm. Even though money is a big deal in the world,
Even though money is a big deal in the
it
world,
touches everything.
it really does touch everything.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
What are my values around money?
What are my values around money?
With a head. I don't want to be poor.
I don't want to be poor.
Eyebrow. I don't want to be poor.
I don't want to be poor.
Side of the eye. And money is a confusing energy
And money is a confusing
under
energy.
the eye. But what are my values?
What are my values?
What are my values?
What are my values?
Chin. It's not really about the money,
It's not really about the money.
but money facilitates things.
Money does facilitate things.
Mm. I want to be clear and boost my values around money.
I want to be clear and boost my values around money.
Top head. So as I relate to money, I'm clear on its value
So as I relate to money, I'm clearer on its value.
and I infuse the energy of money with my values.
And I infuse the energy of money with my values.
Deep breath. So what I meant by that is like I value being generous. If my family's money supply drops below survival, being generous is a heroic act. Okay. If I have enough resource stored away, it's a bit like if there's only one hamburger for four people, that feels different than having four hamburgers for four people. And it feels a lot different to have six hamburgers for four people, right? And money is one of those things that is translated. So, like, one of my values is generosity. If I have sufficient flow so that that part of me that I value gets to be exercised, that feels good to me. I also like to be a steward. It's a word that kind of came back into me. And as soon as I like, I really like stewarding for the future. Um, that's different from like saving and protecting and kind of those survival oriented
Hoarding.
things,
Yeah.
right? Hoarding. Like stewarding for the future feels different to me. So like if I put a certain amount away for the future and I'm stewarding it, I'm tending to it for the future. It's a bit like if I put hamburger in the freezer, right? For the future when, you know, I may want a hamburger and not have it in the refrigerator. And so when I think about money, I value exchange. I value consensual exchange. That's why I choose gliding scale for me is that that feels good to me. It it means that my relationships that are gliding scale, there's a congruence that I feel. That part of it is important to me right now. So like, oh, congruence and generosity and stewardship. As long as my relation, anytime I bring money into it, I'm grounding it in those values. And I also know that money can be just like a thing. Like, all right, yeah, you know, and um, part of boosting our value, especially since there's so much energy around money, um, like I value work. I don't value struggle as much. Like I feel like we should be savvy enough to be able to shift from struggle into something, but I do value work. Like we're here and we're working. I'm showing up to work. This is skill development. This is skill practice. I'm bringing my professional self and my personal self and my vulnerability. It's work. And so what I'm going to do is some of the money that comes in, I take and I steward it so that I can be generous with myself in the future, my family, and others that I hold dear. You see? So there's an energetic boost that happens when we're connected to, well, why does this matter to me to make money as part of this? And I think that when you have people that are very attuned to the generosity and the spiritual purpose and other things, if money's involved, I believe that there's the potential to boost the value as long as you're connecting it to things that actually matter to you, not what you're being told outside. For example, one of the most confusing things I ever had to process was you need to be, if you don't make a certain amount of money, you're not being paid what you're worth, what you're valued. And that was very disorienting to me until I was like, that's actually like, you can't buy an hour of my time for for me to do something that I don't want to do,
Yeah.
right? Because I value consent. Sorry. But I'll pay you $100,000 to no, no, not that. It violates my values. Sorry. Um, okay.
Yeah. No, I think I think what you're saying was one of the thoughts that I think we have archetypes in our society where it's like if you want money, you must focus solely on money and drive yourself to get the money, and that, or you're someone who's kind of like the grasshopper and the ant, different stories where you're either not chasing it or you're like that's all you do. Versus, what if we can be in somewhere in the middle and find like this feels okay to me. I like the abundance that's coming in. This doesn't feel okay to me. I'm gonna, say no to it,
Yeah.
um, and find a balance in our lives with the other things we value.
Mhm.
So yeah, I
Love
love
to
the
hear what's
next.
coming up for people too
Yeah.
as we go forward.
Should we move on to the next?
Yeah, I think so.
So I love this one. The value of wanting to have a healthy sexual relationship versus shame stuff around that, quote unquote. And I think that's is just such an important topic because I work with a lot of people that do sex education and talk about how to be more intimate with their partners, and yet I don't think I could ever say I met anyone without any shame around sexuality. Our society is just and it's gotten, I think, even more negative in the last few years where people feel embarrassed or scared to talk about it versus pleasure is something our body is like it's part of our desires and it's lovely to have pleasure and to have sexual pleasure, whether it's with someone else or by ourselves. So I think it's lovely that I'm glad that people felt safe enough to bring it up here. Um, and I just kind of want to normalize that. I don't know that, I don't think there's anyone that's completely without shame just because the way we're brought up around it. What are your thoughts, Rick?
Um, well, someone said, I have a value to grow in relationships, which has meant I've had many partners all my life. This is in contrast to my family's value to pick one person for life.
Yeah.
Um, I believe that when we have shame, it is certainly a powerful pull. The emotional skill of how we are with shame um, is life transforming, and it's also very challenging. For me, if I feel shame, um, dropping into, do I feel the shame because I'm violating one of my values, my actual values, and am I gonna look at that, or am I violating a societal value that I actually don't hold? But
Yeah.
our primitive brain is designed to um, attune us to ways that we could be unsafe, and going outside of a family norm, a societal norm, a tribal norm, is a big deal for it. And if if your nervous system, your psychology tends to go toward shame, that does not mean that you are actually doing something shameful. Now, if I value consent and I am going outside of consent at all, guess what? The shame is a call for me to recognize that I'm outside of my own integrity. That I believe this is where the skill comes in, discerning without like the reflexive defensiveness, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Can we do a little tapping on the shame? Because I think I love the discernment you were talking about. Is this internal or is it external? And I
yeah,
think sometimes it's very hard when we have intense shame to look at anything that clearly.
yeah.
So karate chop. Even though I have a lot of shame around pleasure and partners,
Even though I have a lot of shame around pleasure and partners,
I want to be more curious.
I want to be more curious.
And I'd love to find this playful.
And I'd love to find this playful.
It's really hard to find this playful right now.
It's really hard to find this playful right now.
I don't know how to explore and discover what I like
I don't know how to explore and discover what I like
because there's so much shame here.
because there's so much shame here.
Top of the head. My system is clogged with shame.
My system can get clogged with shame.
I learned the shame from my parents.
I learned this shame from my parents and others
Yeah, side of the eye in society,
and society
under the eye,
and
some of
that
my
person.
friends. Under the nose. They don't feel confident around sexuality.
They don't feel what?
Confident around sexuality.
Yeah. They don't feel confident or even safe and um uh,
Sure,
anyway,
and they don't have any skills around sexuality.
they don't have the skills I need around sexuality.
Collarbone. They may touch people in a certain way
They may touch people in a certain way.
under the arm, but they don't know how to really explore.
They don't know how to really explore.
Top of the head, the shame clogs their system too.
The shame clogs their system too.
Ira, what if there's nothing wrong with exploring consensually?
What if there's nothing wrong with exploring consensually?
Side of the eye. What if I can notice the shame and then invite it to move to the side?
What if I can notice the shame and invite it to move to the side?
Under the eye. This is my body.
This is my body.
Under the nose. I'm an adult.
I'm an adult.
Chin. I can consensually explore with myself and others.
I can consensually explore with myself and others.
Collarbone. And I can notice this old shame that doesn't really belong to me.
And I can notice any shame that doesn't belong to me.
Under the arm, I can build the muscles of allowing myself to play anyway.
I can build the muscles of allowing myself to play anyway
Top of the head with other partners that want to play with me.
with other partners that want to play with me.
And just take a deep breath. Kind of added that in because about the relationships, having many partners in their life, like that's very similar. Brought up very rigid, and I have no problem. I date multiple people at the same time if that's good. If that happens to be working out for everybody, it's informed. It's not sneaky. Um, and I have no problem with people that are monogamous, especially when they've thought about it and considered it for themselves and decided that versus mom and dad said this, the church said this, and this is what we're going to do. So I love it when people like, yeah, I tried it out or I thought about it and it doesn't feel like a good fit for me. I'm like, great. Love that for you. Um, but I think there's a lot more fun when we can let life be more about curiosity and exploring and deciding like, oh, that didn't feel so good. I don't think I want to do that again. Or I'm not sure if this is that person or not. So maybe I'll test it out. We just get to like broaden things out in terms of possibility. We don't ever have to do anything we don't want to, but just to kind of let go of some of the shame and the rigid have tos and become someone that's like, oh, I feel playful today. How do I want to explore this aspect of my life?
Mm-hmm. For those of us that are energy sensitive, we may have been involved in abusive experiences where the energy of shame was there, but it doesn't necessarily mean because we picked up on it that we did anything shameful. Um, so again, like I believe that one of the things that boosts my sense of value is to know when I feel shame or when I felt shame, what values um, were not being recognized, were not being honored, were not even being asked about, or that I couldn't even assert myself to support my own values, the things that mattered to me. That was certainly true as a teenager. Um, and, I can look at like, oh, and you know what? That really kind of distorted my sense of value, that those were, when we've had our values crushed by trauma, or by experiences, or just a world that we lived in for a while, can be a long while. Um, we can. It takes a little while to recalibrate, and I believe some of that happens by default as we're in a different environment, being supported by other people. Um, if I didn't believe that it was also a skill that we can say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit down about my worthiness. Um, what would it look like if I walked as a worthy person, as somebody who knew their values and could radiate that? Um, well, it might require being okay with those. There's some work around that, that, etc. Do you
Yeah.
want
Well,
to?
I think someone shared, I think that kind of flows from what you were saying. Someone shared that they were raised earlier in the 1900s, and they weren't able to learn what they wanted in sexuality, um, and it's kind of overwhelming to that they feel like maybe they're not monogamous. And I think that that's okay to declare ourselves what we are. Like I consider myself polyamorous, so I will I if I'm in multiple relationships, I want everyone to know each other, and I want it to be love based. I have very much a like a deep connection. That works really well for me. That and I've also been during that time I've dated one person when I was just not dating other people. Um and that person was, like we discussed it, we talked about it. So wherever you are, I think you can declare yourself, you can identify yourself as non-monogamous, even if you're in a monogamous relationship. Like that's your identity. Um, and I think that that can give us some freedom just to declare, like, this is who I am, even if I never get a chance to explore it in this lifetime, or maybe I will. But I am declaring who I am for myself and living in alignment, at least in my identity of who I am. And I think I know for myself when I first started dating women as well, I um I found that there was a freedom, a release inside myself when I was just, nope, I'm supposed to be heterosexual. This is all there is. I will ignore any other feelings. And when I declared, oh, I like to date people in general, not just, I don't care so much about gender. Um, I felt more aligned with myself, and I felt like there was more gentle energy flow in my
Mm,
body. Like I felt good about myself. So around monogamy or non-monogamy, what genders we date, I think that, like what kind of food we like, just being able to break out and be aware that, hey, even though I was fed these rules, these rigid rules, or I thought that was how things were, it was either this or this. Being able to consciously choose gives us a lot of freedom.
yeah, top of the head. These rigid rules
These rigid rules
and how they've confused me.
and how they've confused me.
Eyebrow. All the rigid rules,
All the rigid rules.
side of the eye. All the rigid rules
All the rigid rules.
under the eye. What matters to me
What matters to me?
under the nose? If there weren't those rules,
If there weren't those rules,
chin, what would matter to me?
what would matter to me?
Call on, what would be my choice?
What would be my choice?
Under the arm. If I had emotional freedom here, what would I choose?
If I had emotional freedom here, what would I choose?
What feels right in my core?
What feels right in my core?
Yeah, just don't tell them that I'm considering it. If there's a them, um, I believe that there's emotional skill in um, cultivating within yourself and with people that can resonate and accept. Um, anyone know someone who is accepting of other people's values at like less than a three? Like
They're
um,
pretty rigid and
they're
pretty
very
like
rigid. If somebody looks at the world their way, then they're fine, but they really aren't very high on the acceptance of other nuanced viewpoints and things
I
like that.
know some of it.
Yeah, I know a few. Those are not the people necessarily that we engage with in order to cultivate acceptance and other things. And that's part of another aspect of valuing, boosting the value of emotional skills. I value acceptance. I can accept that people that really are more, I'm using a term, rigid. Steel is rigid. That doesn't make it bad. It makes a terrible trampoline, by the way, especially, um, every material we have is useful for different things, and we have people that are oriented differently. Some people really hold a culture together through rules and authority. I understand that it doesn't fit with my freedom essential nature. Um, but like if I'm in a dynamic with somebody who holds a different value around something that's as core as acceptance, um, I want to be aware that I value those in my life who hold that and practice it. Practicing acceptance is uh, challenging. Um, it it asks of us, and and a core aspect of EFT tapping, which we've been using the standard saying, which when I started tapping, that's really all people said was, "I deeply and completely accept myself." I'd be like, no, I don't. No, I don't accept them. Like, what are you talking about? Accept myself? Accept them? Forget
Not
this.
even a little bit.
I do value acceptance, but I can't get there.
I
I
love
tapped,
that.
and by cultivating acceptance for 30 years, I'm better at it now, and I'm still working at it, because it matters to me so much. It's a boost to me to know how much acceptance matters to me, and I like a world that has more of it rather than a world where there's less of it. And so I'm bringing that value out into the world, in my relationships and my work, in um, my attitudes, uh, best I can.
I think
And
it's
I feel a boost in my value by knowing that about myself.
you do that, yeah. And it sometimes can feel a little scary. Like I was feeling someone just about me sharing about my sexuality and my identity. I was feeling a little insecure. I don't know everyone on these calls, and I was like, "Oh, I hope I don't make anyone. I hate making people uncomfortable." And I also think it's really important for people to know they can be accepted, whatever their gender identity, their sexual identity, their relationship identity. I want everyone to feel comfortable here, so I make it a policy to try to speak up when I think it's appropriate to the conversation. And a couple people said that they appreciated me sharing that. So like I try to use my courage to model that it's okay and safe to be whoever you are here, and other people modeled their courage by letting me know they were appreciating that. So there's like a support we can do, and also when we're breaking some of these rules, we can feel insecure, and sometimes we take insecurity to mean that we're doing something wrong versus this is new and I don't have really strong muscles yet. So I think that discernment to like, if we start feeling a little insecure, like, oh, did I do a bad thing? Like taking a breath and saying, did this fit does this fit the values I have? Which it really did. And we can ask people that we care about. And if they say, yeah, I really support you, like that can help too. We don't have to be just internally referenced. We just be selective about who we externally reference to. Um, and just notice that, oh, sometimes I feel insecure when I'm doing something that I don't know everyone here, and I'm not I want everyone to feel safe in the circle. It's really important to me too.
Mhm.
So if we're starting to try to break down some walls for ourselves, it can take a little bit of energy and a little bit of like, oh, okay, this is a little scary. And we can ask a friend. Like Rick and I have talked many times, and he's always encouraged me to be open about who I am.
Mhm.
So that definitely helps, and we kind of build the muscles for courage around that.
Acceptance, inclusion, um, mhm. There's the quality too of asking those that you are close to what do you value here, especially if they're confronting something. Um, I asked I asked a colleague, well, what do you really value here? Because I was a little lost. And just by getting what they value, I was able to reflect um, that to other people in a way that they were like, oh, that explains everything, which surprised me, like how dramatic it was. But we often think that what someone's being unreasonable. Okay. Well, they may not be coming from their reasoning part of them.
Yeah. They
They
might
may
be,
be coming from their values that are being bumped up against or that are confused in that moment um,
or they
about
might be
what,
just scared out of their mind.
yeah, they could be in their primitive brain. Um, I'm 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 inviting us as we want to boost our value. If you value like knowing someone, I value connection and asking what someone values, I'm looking for resonance and I'm looking for ways to support them in that. Wow, what a difference that makes in the vibe between us when we know like what do you value here, especially if someone's really going through a hard time. Um, I think it's I can support someone better if I know what they value, what matters to them, um, than if I guess. And if I help them get clarity, that's even better.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that I would like to just go into a little bit of like, do we allow ourselves to have value? Like we
Hmm.
talked about this a little bit. Um, again, if we grew up where there was just like, oh, people are making me do things I don't like, or I'm having to live in a world where I don't fit, it's easier to kind of like displace our values or feel valueless. And I think that um, if you're feeling guilty for having opinions about other people, that can be one, or ashamed for having values that are different. I think around the sexuality too, like we're brought up around we're supposed to not really think about it or talk about it. We're just supposed to be really good at it, but not too good at it. And we should like it a lot, but not too much. And we should only like it with certain kind of people at a certain time, preferably in a dark bedroom, like, when no one's around. Like there's so many like unspoken rules. Like, dear Lord, no wonder I have trouble with this thing. Um, and there may be the shame may fill up so much space, it's hard to let ourselves really notice what we like. So I think that when I'd love to do a little tapping on this too, but I think that when we're first learning value our own values about some place and a topic that we feel very agitated or ashamed about, or we feel guilty about it. One of the things I recommend for clients when I'm working with like, what do I like sexually? I don't even know. Um, is research night. Like just set aside a time. You can do this with a partner or without a partner. Um, there's a couple different things. Is it okay for me to share this example, Rick?
Sure. We're coming up on our break time.
Okay,
Um,
well, so I'll just, if it's okay, I'll just give a couple examples so we can go
sure.
for break and ponder this. You can you can interpret this for other things too, if you're dealing with money or whatever, but around sexuality, um, whether you're by yourself or with in a couple or threesome or whatever you have, you can get the same book. And one thing we do is we you can go through and highlight like a racy book with some exciting scenes in there. Um, when I work with couples, I have them each have a different color, and you highlight the scenes that are really racy, and maybe put a would never do a cross next to the ones you would never want to do. But you're trying to discover what's like erotic to your brain and what's also sensual to your body. Like, does your body think this is a good idea? Do you actually like to have it, or do you want to just whisper the fantasy in your ear? So that's erotic versus in your body fantasy want it actually to happen to your body, if that makes sense. Um, both people highlight them, and the ones that they both highlight.
I see I'm not sure whether other people are seeing this. Your video just locked up for me. Anyone else seeing that? Or maybe it's on my side. Kathy, are you still there? Well,
Am I back?
you're back. Yeah.
I don't know. It just went poop. So
So much energy. Boom,
I
boom.
was like, oh no, I can't handle this. But just exploring, and it could be as simple as like, how do I want to be touched? Do I want to be, like what if you're lying in bed, light some candles, whether you're by yourself or not, just exploring different kind of touches. Do I like my just nails along with my skin? Do I like a little more firm touch? Just learning that most people don't know. Most people have never taken the time to figure it out. And when you discover that for yourself or with a partner or partners, life gets really interesting because then you can say, remember that touch you did with me with your nails? Could you do that on my back? Oh my God, that feels so good. Okay, but don't do that here. Like you start learning each other rather than having to guess. And a lot of shame goes away when we have knowledge, when we've had the experience with the knowledge. Shame, it's harder to feel ashamed of something you know brings delight and pleasure to yourself or your partner. So I just wanted to share that because I think it's a useful way for people to counter things. And the same can be about money. Like, what are some skills I can do to manage my money or to feel less shameful around it? What feels good to me?
And someone shared, I found an awful lot of these loaded topics too complicated to really understand what I value. So I end up keeping things very simple,
Mm,
not just sexuality, many things, other things as well. To me, a value, like what you just described energetically, there's a lot of different aspects to that.
yeah.
It's an experience.
Yeah.
And for me also, like um, if I come back to I value deep intimacy and connection with someone I care about.
Mhm.
Well, that grounds that whole thing in a different place that's true for me. So um, that's something that I didn't that I'm glad we're getting a chance to share is that we if you if there's something that's chaotic and confusing, is there a value that you do know about yourself
Mhm.
that that can be grounded into? Um, and if so, let it sit there for a little bit to see what evolves or doesn't from it. Um, anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's, yeah,
We're gonna take a 7 minute break. We'll be
yeah.
back at the top of the hour. Yeah, and
I really appreciate all of you coming on this ride with us and exploring. Like, it's a tough topic, and you're a rock. I can't wait to
mhm,
see you back to go further.
welcome back. Where do you feel drawn to go with this?
Um, I was wondering about doing some tapping, and I just realized I replied to the wrong direct message. So if my message to you doesn't make sense, I'll fix it in a minute. I replied to the wrong person. Um, I would love to just maybe do some tapping, inviting us to have more clarity to let our values come back to us,
Mm,
and for us to have clarity. If that feels okay.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I invite you if you're just let yourself be here, let the outside world kind of drift away, and just be here with us now, and just take a nice slow deep breath. Let yourself drop into your body, feel your toes on the floor, butt in the chair, karate chop. Even though there wasn't a lot of room for my values growing up,
Even though there wasn't a lot of room for my values growing up,
and there wasn't a lot of room from society anyway,
there wasn't a lot of room in society anyway.
for me to have my own personal values.
My own personal values.
I am making room for my values now,
I am actively making room for my values now.
and I invite all those displaced values,
And I invite all those displaced values,
the ones that feel really good to me,
the ones that feel really good to me,
to come back home.
to come back home.
Top of the head, they belong in my heart.
They belong in my heart.
Eyebrow, they belong in my mind.
They belong in my mind.
Side of the eye, I didn't get to practice having these values when I was growing up.
I didn't get to practice having clear values growing up.
Under the eye, and I'm ready to practice in baby steps.
And I'm ready to practice in baby steps
Under the nose in the right times and situations for me.
in the right times and situations for me.
Chin, I can be smart about this.
I can be smart about this,
Collarbone, and I can own my own identity.
and I can own my own identity,
Under the down, whether it's safe to be open about that or not.
whether it's safe to be open about that or not.
Top of the head, I welcome these values back home,
I welcome these values back home,
and I release the shame.
and I release the shame.
Nice deep breath.
Ah. Mm.
I wonder if one thought I had was if we had our values, if we let ourselves feel valuable and valued around our values. Can you just imagine, just now for a moment now, if you let yourself just kind of own your own identity, your own what matters to you, how would you feel inside and how might you walk differently in the world? I know that when I'm trying to conform to other people's values, I'm certainly not confident because people's values change. And when I'm with different groups, different values matter. And I'm like, ooh, what am I doing it right? Versus when I'm like, oh, I'm gonna honor who I am. I can be smart. I'm not gonna go to the middle of a Ku Klux Klan meeting and say Black Lives Matter. I can stand up for that value in other ways that is less dangerous. And some people, however people fight that is their own choice. Um, but I do think that we walk differently when we're holding our identity to ourselves at the very least. Like, oh, I am this person. I value this. I express myself this. I prefer to express myself this way. So if you'd like to share in the chat, you're most welcome to.
So someone brought up that they were asked to list their top 5 values and, been overwhelmed a bit by Googling it. Um, I, I'm not a hierarchy person. So if you ask me what my top 5 values are, uh, I value an awareness of a spectrum and a circle. So what are the top 5 spots on a circle or in an ecosystem? I can't do it. So like the overwhelm in that case isn't necessarily about being it just doesn't fit what I value. Now, if I was asked to do that within a relationship, if my partner says, "Well, what's alive for you right now? What's a value or 5 that you'd like to share with me to help me tune to your inner world?" Well, that's not asking me to rank order them, but I could say, um, savvy. It's a weird one. It's one that hasn't been alive in me in a long time, but there's a quality of being in the infinite game. And like they're saying, oh, there's uncertainty. Well, I know how to be with uncertainty. Oh, there's stresses. I know how to be with it, stresses. Oh, there's sickness. I know how to be with sickness. Oh, like so if you wanted, you all now know that right now, savvy is one of the things. It's a reminder of some skill that I cultivated over the decades that allow me to do that. And so it's an invitation sometimes when we're put on the spot and something is feeling overwhelming, you can ask, well, is there a value of mine, something that matters to me that this feels it goes counter or sideways to? It could be like there's a pressure to reveal where, what you really want is to reveal what's a choice. Like transparency is something I value, but consent I value as well. And so unless they go together, if you demand that I be transparent, we got a problem because I have other values that will kick in to say, and And so I could say, well, I value transparency and I also value consent and I also value that body guidance that gives me the yes that says, this is what I'm wanting to share into this space. Um, and just that. um,
Well, I think too, if you Google values and if Google values, you're going to come up with a list of hundreds of different things that are somewhat similar too to each other. Some of them. I think if we can look in just our lives, like I spent part of this afternoon, even though I was at a workshop all day, helping my mom with something on her computer. And I value kindness. I value supporting other people. Like, where are we making certain like sacrifice in the sense that I really would have liked to have been away from the computer for that time, or where are we stretching ourselves to be someplace or do something like that might help us see our values a little bit, especially if it's not something no one was telling me I had to. It was just
mhm,
I didn't want her to be worried about it overnight. So, like, where can you that would be a way to find your to look at what you value in a more organic way rather than looking at the list of hundreds of things that are very heady. Like, huh, I really value people having choice, or I value people being self-expressed, or whatever. That might help narrow it down.
mhm.
Um, yeah, just sorry, just checking on the messages. Um, all right, we want to talk about some of the emotional skills. I think it's really important because it's very hard to have our own. Like, we're talking about owning our own values and being self-expressed. And if we're around someone who's in primitive brain, or who is not respecting boundaries or is freaking out, um, that's very, very hard to own that. And it's especially hard if it's our own self that's like, oh my god, I'm going to talk about sexuality. Oh my god, oh my god. Like, it's their discernment and calm and centered and thoughtful. Those all go out the window when primitive brain or lack of boundaries or lack of skill. Like, we want to have the skills with the drive, if that makes sense.
It does. Um, I'm also looking forward over the next years. What emotional skills do you want us to focus on? So whether it's now or anytime in the future, I'd love to hear from you. If you email support@thrivingnow.com, it comes to both Kathy and I. Um, if you could let us know, hey, this is an emotional skill. It's one that if I could take it to the next level, it would be it would be really useful for me. It would be really helpful for me. It would support my thriving life to have this emotional skill. Kathy and I started with like reprogramming the primitive brain. Like to me, that's a real skill. Reprogramming the primitive brain says, what's a primitive brain? How do I know? Fight, flight, freeze is kind of the shortcut of it. What do I do? How did it get like cattywampus to what I really want to be and how I want to live? Um, we have a program, Reprogram Your Primitive Brain, thrivingnow.com/primitive dash brain. Um, and a lot of these other real skills are uh, the other aspects of the ecosystem. They all touch on the primitive brain because we have one. It has its own attitudes toward everything. Um, when Kathy was talking about pleasure, your primitive brain probably has some noise about that or some assertions. When I think about being savvy, my primitive brain goes, "Yeah, but don't be arrogant." And I'm like, ah, that's the so like
It can feel like an electric cattle prod, and you're like, I'm not going to do anything at all now. I'm
right.
just going to be really quiet.
Like, so one of the things about emotional skills is recognizing, oh yeah, if it matters to me, there's going to be noise.
Mhm.
And what do I do with that noise? Um, so like as soon as it came out of my mouth, I'm savvy, which is one of the ways to test, I'm eager, I'm savvy. And I was like, oh God, I'm glad no one's here to hear that. um,
No.
right? Like that that's a what? It's a flight. It's a flight from something that I am. I am savvy. And even as I say that, I start getting a little red in the cheeks. Good. As part of me developing the skill and part of the skill, like I've been using I'm sorry as a like a emergency outlet. Like I say it still a lot. I say it to God, like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Like if and my guidance is guiding me to say, I'm savvy and see what happens to the energy with that. Now, I hope you find that weird. I think a lot of emotional work is weird. I believe that it blends our spiritual connection and our emotional um, life. Um, I believe that it is part of the freedom is to explore things that feel weird and uncomfortable. Um, and I just know from a foundational level the life changing effect of recognizing when I'm in my primitive brain, recognizing when my partner is in their primitive brain, when my children are in their primitive brain, when the person replying on Twitter is in their primitive brain. Um, when like, wow, that is so useful. And instead of labeling it as defensiveness, it becomes more like, oh, okay, well, I'm talking to their monkey mind or their lizard self. Um, we're right up against that. And that's part of boosting um, my own sense that I'm developing a skill. And this is part of the tracking. We talk about baby steps. Um, Emotional skill work is typically not just like a big cure. Now, sometimes there's a place where like, oh, I was like this, and all of a sudden I am mostly over here. That feels great. That's not the end point. To me, emotional skills are like wisdom. Um, there's no cap. If you value how you feel as you develop a sense of your own energy, emotional skill is energy and motion, um, your own skill with your own energy, and that feels good to you, noticing like, oh, I actually understand the primitive brain and how it works in me. Oh, I tend to go toward flight. So like that awareness, some people go toward fight, some people go toward flight. Around certain things, I used to go toward freeze. Um, what's great about that is that when you're in a situation and you go to that go-to, oh, I'm in my primitive brain. I'm not gonna make a decision right yet. It's not an emergency. If it is, you'll make the decision without even being aware of it. Um, and that's it's an invitation that how life changes when we start noticing the humanity and the range of humanity, including in ourselves. Um, and well, when other people are in their primitive brain, I believe that there's a lot of things. If you value safety, you can say, right now, I value safety and I'm going to give you some space. I'm going to take some space. Um, I can hold up a hand. Hey, this is not okay for me, and I'm going to dot dot dot.
I think
Um,
that's sometimes hard
right.
for people that have I'm gonna say I think society acculturates, women identified people a little bit more this way, but I think it's for all of us that when we've not been allowed to have our own values and we come up with someone who's not there, either they're not respecting our boundaries or they have something very different belief wise or they're very upset, we tend to lose our center of gravity.
Sure.
And I've been doing again, radical honesty. Some of it I like, some of it I don't. They talk about the split screen, where can I be with my own feelings about this and my own beliefs, and can I also be aware of this other person? And they're like, maybe they're really upset about this topic or they're really uncomfortable. and they can be yes and. It's not like, oh, they're upset, I have to let go of all my beliefs. Um, or they're very angry, I have to like agree with them. It's like I think that was kind of like you can, oh yeah, I can have my beliefs, you can have your reaction, and we both can be okay. And I think our primitive brain gets really agitated when we start doing this. The muscles are very weak. Someone said I'd like to get better at being present in a helpful place when someone needs to open up about something that's difficult or painful, knowing how to stand in a place that's good for them and me too. I think that's like our primitive brain will freak out because maybe we haven't practiced this very much. So we can just take it in baby steps and go, oh, I'm going to tolerate this feeling of yes and for just a few seconds. They don't agree with me. I'm actually safe. I can still have my beliefs. Okay, I can just go back to what I normally do, but to flex those muscles a little bit, to find that balance of, I think it really depends on how safe I feel. So if I'm with a boss that I don't feel that safe with, I'm certainly going to err towards appearing to conform more
Yeah.
versus if I'm with a good friend where I'm like, I'd like to talk about this more because I don't really agree with it. And I'm curious, where does this coming from? Because it doesn't match what I know of you.
Mm.
So we get to find the balance, but practicing those muscles and tolerating the discomfort that comes up can really build muscles where we can split screen that, if that makes sense, where we can like, oh, here's my beliefs. This is who I am, and you're not dealing with it well. And I get to decide how I can still be with me and decide how much to share. Does that make sense?
It does. I think this skill of tolerating discomfort, um, not as a lifestyle choice, but as a moment of building that muscle. Um, I think about building muscle in the gym. There is definitely moments of discomfort that you're tolerating for a purpose, for a reason, for something that you value. Um, yeah, interesting. Um, Anyone else have something that where they would like to go? We have about 11 minutes, 10 minutes. Some aspect of this exploration that you'd like us to touch on.
So yes, and reminds of defensive states and nervous system, the tolerance of ambiguity. Yeah, people don't deal with ambiguity really well, especially if they have trauma or their brains are not as flexible. They haven't really exposed themselves to different perspectives and different ideas. It tends to be very rigid.
hmm Someone asked about how do our values blend with our desires and needs.
Mhm.
Um, what's fascinating to me is I'm such an emotional being that if I'm focused on being eager, I'm going to desire things and have certain needs than if I'm focused on comfort or ease. If I'm, if I, if I value um, acceptance, I'm going to have a different attunement than if I'm valuing um, holding a space, which I do value. They may not be big differences, but um, and this is where I'm leaning as we go forward. Like, how do you blend values consciously? So I value being calm and confident. I'm far from perfect. But if I wake up in the morning or if I'm distressed in some way and I say calm and confident, I have a value of walking in the world that way. If I blend calm and confident with eager, I'm going to have some different desires and needs um, that I'm going to try to get from the universe and with the universe and with the people around me than if I'm calm and confident and competent. Oh, I love being competent. If I want to be competent, I'm going to pick something that I'm going to feel competent about. Um, if I want to feel useful, calm and confident, my desires and needs are going to flow from that a bit differently. If I'm in my primitive brain, I just want it to stop. If my needs are going to be like, I want the pain to stop. I want the pain to stop. I want the pain to stop now. What do I have to do to stop the pain? Um, I can be in pain and calm and confident and be curious or listening. I value listening. I can listen to my body's guidance. It's like, oh, yeah, I want the pain to stop. Thank you, primitive brain. And my listening is there are layers of frustration in that tissue. Okay. Ah,
If I can, because
go.
I love what you shared, and I want to share it from a slightly different perspective.
Great.
I think that when our values and our desires seem to be in conflict, there may be something out of balance. So I was really brought up. I love to work hard. It's just part of who I am. I'm like, it just feels good to get a lot done. Um, that was very, very much encouraged in my life. And in corporate world, that's like, yes, give her more. She can handle it. So that got really out of balance with the part of me that loves to sit quietly in the backyard and hear the birds and just sit there and stare at the grass growing or whatever. Um, so I would feel the desire to be quiet, and I would feel like that was in conflict with the desire to get a lot done. It felt like they were direct conflict, but really I have both. And when I can recognize I have both, and if I start feel really strong longing for something, maybe it's because I think our desires often point towards what our values are. Um, and so my value, it was not giving myself enough knowledge, acknowledgement of like, oh, I do need some downtime. I actually work much better. I get more done in a shorter time when I'm well rested and I've had time watching the birds. I've also had that with eating. I've eaten in I abuse history. Food was the way I felt comfort. And there was like conflict. Like I value being in, fit and feeling good about my body. And here I am eating food that I don't want. The need for safety was so I didn't I think I had had so little safety sometimes that I didn't even acknowledge it as something I valued. So I couldn't see that was one of the things I was looking at. So if you have a conflict, I'd invite you to dig a little deeper because I don't think our true desires and our true values are ever in conflict unless we're out of balance and ignoring one of those values, if that makes sense. I think that there are what we desire and what we value when we've cleared out traumas and we have good balance, I believe that they would be truly aligned with each other.
Hmm. Which fits, my model of the emotional world is an ecosystem that I value hard work. I value replenishment. I value generosity. I value re replenishment. So like there, if you think of your emotional world and these values as an ecosystem, there's less of a, oh, they have to fit all the time. Um, mm, it's sunny part of the day, it's not part of the day. You can be really eager for a moment and really useful for a moment, or really appreciating for a moment, or really just basting and savoring for a moment.
I love that
Um,
basting. Yes, it's a great word.
so that's part of the beautiful thing about what we're doing with real skills is um, we're touching on a lot of different aspects, and that's why I've got a 30-year notion about this rather than oh, we're just going to get this done. Um, um, and we do invite your wisdom. We invite the things that you're noticing in your world that, particularly if your world is calling forth skill that that is it matters to you, I would love to know. It helps me to know what's going on in people's worlds. We cover the planet across our whole community of thousands of people. And there's a core group that shows up for these that helps co-create them through your feedback, through your energy, through your attention. I know that I value my attention. What I put my attention on, I change. And I can feel from each of your names, even if your video is not off, the attention that you bring, the questions that arises, the contrast that you pull away from, the closeness that you give to certain ideas changes this for Kathy and I. It
That's
evokes things. And that's a profound part of crafting an emotional world where we each get to know our values, share what we value with one another, and then make it more easeful and fun and pleasurable and all the good things to walk as a human who has our unique set of values. Uh, to me, all of my artistry rises from my values, whether I'm consciously aware of it or not. The more conscious I've become through this work and through engagement with you all as a coach, the more that I get to feel the richness when I recognize, oh, there's somebody that has this value. Ah, so glad you exist in the world. Thank you. And thank you for having the value of doing this and being here together with us. It's made a huge difference.
Um, yeah, if I would, I just love for you for just a moment to tune into yourself and realize one of your values is exploring values, or you wouldn't have spent an hour and a half on a Sunday afternoon doing it, or whatever time of the day it is for you. So I think that's really awesome. I think it's amazing, and I want more people like you around. So if you can, thank yourself for being the kind of person that wanted to show up for this kind of a call, which most people are like, "You're gonna do what? Crazy. Like, let's have a barbecue." And well, we can have a barbecue, but we can be there present with what our values and desires are. So I just think you're amazing, and I just want to acknowledge I appreciate your curiosity and your willingness to look at these really tough subjects. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for the feedback. Just, I remember the first client that I had for tapping, and they said, I feel worthless. And we tapped and we cried because I hadn't healed my own at that point. I feel worthless felt really like close to the bone for both of us. And some divine guidance had us start talking about what matters to us. And it was a big shift for both of us. And I appreciate you all being here. And I came to understand I deeply value co-creation. And tapping for me is a profound one. We say something and you say what we said, you modify it, you say, no thanks. That's co creating at its finest for me. So bless you. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy, for all of these co creatings.
My pleasure. Love that you brought this together. Yeah, have an awesome rest of the weekend and amazing
Yeah.
week.
We'll be back with you soon. Bye.